we've got a fireside chat, which would be leveraging mindfulness to reduce stress and cultivate resilience in the workplace. And we just learned a lot about chronic disease. We learned a lot about kind of diversity and inclusion and women's equity, and how it's not just a conversation for women, but for men and women alike, and how to have these affinity groups for women that include men. And so it's been a really great summit thus far, and I'm excited to include the talk that we'll be doing now. So I'll ask Karina Mueller to come on back if she can, and go ahead and unmute and show your screen, as well as hello, and also Pooja, if you would unmute your sound and show your screen so we can start our fireside chat. So welcome back to our presentation. It's been enlightening. I've learned a lot myself, and it's a good challenge for our organization to figure out what we do next as far as research is concerned. So I'm excited to talk to you ladies about mindfulness as it relates to your private practices and your experience. And so once again, those folks that might be just joining us, I'd like to introduce both Karina Mueller. She's with Mariposa Wellness, and she was with us earlier in the day. She is the CEO of Mariposa Wellness, a specialist in the area of mindfulness and a wellness expert. And also we have the pleasure of having Pooja Madden, leadership and mindfulness consultant for leaders in corporations. She's an author and a speaker, and she is part of the Mindfulness Map. So welcome back, and we appreciate both of you lending your expertise to the conversation and this fireside chat. So I'm going to jump right into that if that's okay.
Yes, let's do it.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to start with you, Karina. How does a wellness professional such as yourself bring best practices in combating stress in the workplace?
A great question, Jenny. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I always like to go back to the mission of Mariposa Wellness, and I think some people had heard me say this earlier, is this idea of creating a toolbox. But more, even deeper than creating the toolbox, it's around the simplicity, accessibility, and ease of things, so that we all deal with all kinds of stressors and all kinds of emotions throughout our day and our evening and on our way to work, on our commutes, or on our way home. But what is it that we can gravitate to or reach into that's simple, easy, and accessible, and can be done in like 10 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes to help us with whatever the emotional situation that may be occurring? And it could be as simple as the exercise that I took you guys through. And one of the reasons I do that one with grounding your feet and standing is because I think it's sort of a classic moment of grounding that we all need throughout our day. For me personally, I like to say that some people have road rage. I have New York public transportation rage. I tend to do a lot of grounding on my feet and just standing there and finding my center and finding my breath before I get on the subway, but when I get off the subway, before I walk into a client and have to teach other people. So again, I haven't purchased anything. I haven't changed my clothing. I've just decided to take a moment to literally stand on my feet. So my view on combating stress or coping is find those little things that work for you, that are simple, that also won't leave you feeling like you haven't accomplished something. I think the other thing is that we as human beings sometimes, and especially as women, we set these vast goals for ourselves and we say, oh, I'm going to meditate twice a day for 20 minutes every day, and because that'll help me with stress, or I'm going to go to the gym for 2 hours every day. And then when you start off super enthusiastic, and then the minute you fall off, you then are even meaner to yourself. So my goal is, can you do something in 1 minute, 2 minutes that's going to make you feel better? And then eventually you're going to want to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day.
So smaller bite-sized tools that would help each individual kind of work through the workday.
Exactly.
That's great. That's great. And Pooja, why do you think mindfulness leadership is necessary to tackle issues and create better solutions for women in the workplace?
Yeah, hi Jenny. So when we look at leadership, we're looking at a very different set of additional challenges that leaders face. So there is stress, right? And every one of us, in whatever role we play, experiences stress. And then there is this thing called power stress, which is this additional layer of stress that leaders experience. And that has to do with this awareness that my role, my leadership role has influence, and with that comes responsibility. And so when we look at that, the need for leaders, especially in this environment where there's this pressure to be more innovative, and there are social concerns, there are environmental concerns, and there are a lot of cultural concerns on whether we are really being inclusive and diverse, and we are really showing up with walking our talk around equity, right? So when it comes to all of those concerns, there has to be mindfulness allows us, first of all, to have mastery over our own self. And so as we learn personally as leaders to learn how to short circuit our power stress responses, or as we cultivate more emotional intelligence, or as we learn how to master our time and to be better at scheduling and prioritizing, as we incorporate and integrate mindfulness into many of our leadership disciplines, then we start to see how our leadership shows up in relation to others. And so the first part of managing ourselves literally leads to more efficiency for the leader himself, but also for the team, because everybody's watching the leaders, whether they say something or not. It's really in their actions and in their choices that they are being watched. And so there is that piece that leads to more efficiency in the organization. But the other piece has really to do with some of the company culture issues and how mindfulness can help with that. And so, when we look at that, creating that bandwidth in how we show up for others, then we can create spaces that are safe for us to be leaders that people can come to with, hey, like this is a real issue for me, and I need to feel heard and seen around it. And so when it comes to women related issues, Jenny, I mean, right now, we're 100 years from equity. Like that's what research is telling us, and I don't think we have that kind of time. Like this planet is going to burn down to the ground if we don't work towards really making the workplace a safer, a more a more energizing place for women, from both a physical and a psychological and a mental health perspective. And so when we bring more consciousness into our leaders, then they're able to show up for some of these big picture problem solving, these solutions. They have the capacity and the bandwidth within themselves to take a step back, to take those mindful pauses and say, hey, I need to not just get caught up in the grind of my day, but also just step back and look at, where is this company going? What is my vision for it? How do I want my employees to feel when they walk through the door? How do I want my women to feel? Do they feel really included and healthy on many different levels? Do they feel well represented? Do they feel that they have a voice? And so all of those decisions happen when leaders know how to manage themselves and their energies very masterfully. And that's why mindfulness at the leadership level, in my opinion, is absolutely critical if we want to have a serious shift in how to make the workplace a better place for women.
Right, and so helping leaders by providing the tools and education that your company does and that Karina's company does allows them to, kind of tackle their own person and their own their own ideas, and then they bring those solutions to the table to their own employees. Sort of that culture shift between the leadership and down.
Absolutely. So if we look at it in two ways, one is for leaders to really have a buy-in that this is very important, to have women's health as a priority. And the other piece is like, how do we solve these problems, right? So we are looking at innovative, disruptive ideas. And like Einstein says, we can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. And mindfulness allows us to leap into different states of consciousness so that we can actually tap into some more creative, innovative ideas that are real, that are sustainable, that are actually holistic in their approach. And so that's why without mindfulness, we can grapple more than we would at the leadership level.
Right. I've experienced this myself working with Karina and just realizing, there's a lot of things on my personal plate and I'm leading this organization and she'll say, take a step back and use these tools, which kind of leads me to that next question, Karina, if you will. What are 3 ways, just 3, that an employee can balance their day at work along with their days at home in terms of energy to get everything done? You've helped me along with this on the employee level, and then our leadership, I think, can also take heed with some of these tools that you've got. So 3 different tools you might be able to, or ways that an employee can balance their day at work, on their days at home, and keep energy.
Keep energy. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I guess one of the biggest things, and I think Pooja touched on this really nicely just now with mindfulness, is also for me, it's creating the word of awareness and using awareness. So at the center of any tool is a sense of awareness. So it fits in, it ties together with mindfulness. They kind of go hand in hand. But if you're not even, I find that a lot of times, whether it's a leader, whether it's an employee, as a human being, sometimes we're not even aware of what's happening to us. And until someone next to us says, it's okay to take a breath, it's okay to stop, gives you that actual permission, you keep going and you really run yourself to the ground, right? So what I would say to people is, my goal is to help you build that awareness of what is actually happening. What are you actually feeling? What is really the critical thinking behind what you're feeling? And a lot of times it's that is sort of the center of the tool, right? It's developing an awareness of, did you just spend the last 10 minutes writing an email and holding your breath? And after you finish reading that email, do you feel like you're short of breath? But you haven't gotten up, you haven't gone running, you haven't done anything. You've just sat there and typed in very intensely and not actually realized that you haven't stopped to breathe. So at the center of all these tools, it's building your sense of awareness of yourself. And again, as Pooja put it, in terms of being mindfully aware, whether you're a leader and being mindfully aware of who's in front of you and how you're addressing them, but really you have to understand what is happening within yourself and having a sense of awareness of what is happening in your physical and mental being at that moment. So for me, I always go back to where we started in terms of grounding and just standing on your feet before you walk into the meeting, before you walk into the office, before you walk into home. And then maybe it's doing a twist at your desk, which are a great sense of release because it is a physical, literal action that you are twisting out. And of course, there's the mental action of twisting out any tension or strain or thought process. Those are really good. And sometimes it's as simple as just stopping for a moment and counting 10 breaths out. And saying, okay, before I respond to that email and jump into that phone call and maybe have a reaction that I don't want to have, I'm going to take a moment to breathe and ground myself and maybe do a stretch, maybe do a twist, maybe walk to the bathroom and back and understand how I truly want to respond. Because if I just react, then I lose that sense of awareness and I lose that ability to really interact with the other person or even myself. And then it just perpetuates a circle of stress and tension and chronic pains and other issues. So I think it's building on this idea of what are my tools to help me build more awareness within myself and the people around me? And how am I mindful of my actions and words in order to better respond?
I think that's so important to think about it before you say it, take those, to make part of your toolbox being aware, standing on your feet, and then more importantly, intentional about how you might respond to any kind of situation before you actually fly off the handle and respond, or just quickly respond. It's much more important to, take these couple of little exercise tips that you've just given, and then, be mindful of how you respond. And, we were talking about equity and leadership, and Pooja, we had talked about this as well. Like, how can mindfulness help us get to leadership equity? And is there a way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And Jenny, I feel that there is, the applicability of mindfulness, especially in leadership disciplines, is so profound. And at the mindfulness map, we have a two-pronged approach to mindful leadership. And one is cultivating an awareness of the present moment. So just like Karina was saying, like, what am I doing? Am I here? Can I take a few deep breaths before I send out that email? And just that awareness of the present moment leads to us really supercharging our leadership skills. So, it helps us manage our stress better. It helps us manage our time better. We become more conscious communicators. We become better listeners. We can also really step into our capacity to be creative and in the zone. So so there's some of those benefits that, like I said, immediately lead to more efficiency for the leader and for the organization. And then the other piece, which I think of as the deeper, more juicy work of mindful leadership, has to do with being aware of cultivating awareness of our biases and our perceptions and our belief systems. And when we go down that road, then we are looking at the culture piece of what are the values that drive this company, what is the purpose and mission of this company. Are we a company that shows up with empathy and compassion? Do we have the emotional intelligence to lead those, with those values? Are we able to resolve conflict in a way so that we are really aware of where our language is coming from? Because our thoughts are informed by our belief system. So it's like you have to dig deeper and not just change language, So sensitivity trainings are great, but if we want to really have changes that make an impact, then we have to go deeper into what is really going on. And so the same thing applies as well to when we talk about awareness of our biases and perceptions. Then we can do the real work of, inclusion and diversity, gender equity, because we are looking at when and how did key concepts around power and race and gender, when did they develop? How did we learn to give away our power as women, and how did men just learn to take it and take up space and make the asks? And so as we expand our awareness into some of those concepts, as we become more aware of our implicit and unconscious bias, and this is true for everybody across the board. We think right now most men are making decisions about who gets hired, who gets promoted, and who gets funded, right? And so, of course, there's a big work to be done there in raising the consciousness of our male leaders. But as more women and people of color end up in leadership positions, we will have our own work to do around bias as well. Like, I remember when I worked for tech startups, I was a bro. Like, I had such a masculine energy about me that was really I was not aware of my biases either towards other women. And so there's always this work to be done. And that's where mindfulness comes in and says, hey, let's like peel these layers and get to the core of what is going on. And I think unless we add mindfulness to the initiatives that are currently being enforced, because we hear a lot, and we, in the previous panel, Jenny, there was a lot of discussion around there's an intention, and companies can have the intention of being more diverse and having more equity. However, where is the action? And the action cannot happen unless we are looking at some of the deeper nuances of why we are who we are and why we make the decisions we make. And mindfulness helps us get there in a really powerful, but also in a very gentle, non-judgmental, and, if I may say, loving way, to look at our own implicit, unconscious biases and make more conscious decisions and choices instead.
I think that's so true. And even the doctor who, prior, participated in our in the meditation exercise that you did for us. And he said that was probably the calmest part of his week. So, it's true if you're intentional and you take the time to be mindful. I know, Karina does, says this to all of us in the same way, but I also love how you're bringing in, the point of diversity and getting to your own personal biases and admitting them and then figuring out how to overcome them. And when you take a step back and be mindful and think about the things that you might have in your mind that are biased, you can then approach it with an honest perspective and how you can change it. So, and Karina, we have, unique challenges as we learned in the previous fireside chat. What are ways that you would suggest combating, stress, considering, the unique challenges that women face and combating these issues?
Well, in that everything we talked about and what Pooja was saying too, the aside from awareness, the other big word that comes up for me is listening, which means how do we listen to ourselves and listen to others? And when I say listen to ourselves, I have a big connection between the mind-body situation in terms of like your musculoskeletal system, your actual physical system, and it is probably my physical therapy training, as well as your mental connection. And I feel like if we don't listen to ourselves and don't develop and cultivate this sense of awareness, then we'll continue to perpetuate this sense of stress and hurting ourselves, right? And how, as Pooja was saying, how we show up as leaders or how we show up as employees or how we show up as a family member or a friend or however we show up as a human being, right? And I find that women in particular, and I know Jenny, you and I have talked a lot about this, is that women feel like there's a whole other layer, and it goes back to Pooja's concept of biases, right? But the biases that we have on ourselves are probably the most stressful than anybody would actually put on us as women, right? As women, we feel like we have to do it all, right? We have to be the perfect employee, the perfect mom, the perfect sister, the perfect wife, the perfect partner, like everything has to be perfect. We have to be multitasking all the time. And then there's that sense of guilt as women of, oh my God, I'm doing nothing. I can't be doing nothing. That doesn't happen. Like and then we don't, it develops into a whole movie in our head as to the fact that we stopped and did something for ourselves to take care of ourselves and not everybody else. And then fighting that sense of guilt around that because we're not being perfectionists on everything, because we're not being everything to everyone. So I find that women need to develop and cultivate that sense of awareness, that sense of listening to ourselves and giving ourselves permission to actually press the pause button and to actually stop. And that doesn't mean that it's going to make you less of a successful woman in any field that you're in. I always like to say to people I teach, and hopefully they won't get fired for this, but I always like to say, I highly doubt that your boss will fire you. Or as a leader, I highly doubt that you will lose employees if you actually take a minute and say, you know what, I actually need a moment right now. We both may need a moment. I'm going to take a few breaths. Maybe you want to do that too. Or, you know what, I just need a moment. I need to close my office door, or I need to take a walk outside and come back, but I need a moment. And we as women have a very hard time saying something like that and giving ourselves permission to take those moments and say, I'm going to then be a better whatever it is you want to add to that, but also I'm physically going to feel better. And maybe it'll help with the chronic pains or frustration or anxiety or emotional well-being or headaches or whatever else that may be coming up. The other thing I always like to say is that your body begins to whisper at you, and then it speaks to you, and then it screams. And then, God forbid. So if we don't learn to cultivate this sense of mindfulness or sense of awareness or listening to ourselves in order to better listen to others, then it's really going to continue to affect our health, both mental and physical.
Yeah, I mean, and I was thinking about what the doctor was talking about with endometriosis and how the stage of this disease is in the typical stage. It starts early, and it's just like this 10-year road of frustration, and nobody talks about it. And so somebody that's suffering from that, and the huge statistics that he quoted, it's like, if they just had 5 minutes with Pooja or Karina to talk about being aware of what's happening, and then to have the wherewithal to fight for what they know is wrong. I think that's in everything from our medical health to our, our leadership climb and our role in work and our role at home, and to combat that superwoman kind of syndrome, through a mindful activity, I think is so important, and also understanding this is what I'm going through right now and being present in that, and not accepting, or thinking that what's really happening is untreatable, uncurable. It's really getting to know yourself and understanding yourself by taking a minute and being mindful of what's going on.
And sometimes that can be really scary for all of us. As someone that came out of many years of the corporate craziness and living in many different continents and working in different languages and running like a crazy person all the time, that concept for me, originally, the idea to stop and pause was frightening. Because the moment I actually stopped to pause, I would have to face a lot of things that I had no interest in facing. And it was a lot easier to run myself to a point of exhaustion so that I wouldn't really have to face other things. Because as Pooja was saying, mindfulness is beautiful and it brings up a lot of amazing things. It can also be scary at times, right? And it can also bring up a lot of things that, like she was saying, our biases or our feelings or our emotions or our actions that maybe we don't always want to face, but eventually they come out one way or another and we're forced to face them.
Right, and I was thinking, in terms of, Pooja, in terms of mindfulness, combating chronic disease, I think there's definitely, something behind that, and love to know how you think, mindfulness might be able to combat chronic disease, such as, diabetes or heart disease or stroke. Like, how can mindfulness help that?
Yeah, so Jenny, it's interesting that we're talking about chronic disease because, and Dr. McCarris's talk I felt so deeply into it because I was his perfect role model for all the stats he was talking about on the severe spectrum. I had very severe endometriosis. It's one of the reasons that I would have to take paid leave during, when I would have flare-ups because it was just impossible for me to function. And he was talking about being curled up in bed and can't get out of bed, and that was me. And so I know the power of mindfulness in reversing and healing some kind of chronic diseases. And there's a lot of research now. I mean, this was in the early 2000s when I was working for very stressful tech startup in stressful tech startup environments, and I was practicing mindfulness. So it was an interesting world at that time. But today, 15, 20 years later, we have a fair amount of research. There have been at least 15 different studies that have been done to measure for what the impact of mindfulness is on chronic diseases. And so when we're talking about endometriosis, fibromyalgia, type 2 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and some cardiovascular diagnoses as well. And across the board, the practice of mindfulness helps to reduce and alleviate those symptoms. And so, we are kind of still in the early stages of, in the West at least, of this research on what it can do to the physical body. I mean, honestly, in the West, in the East, this has been for 5,000 years. People have been meditating and incorporating that as part of their wellness routine, So it's like you do your yoga and you do your meditation and you eat, based on your dosha style, and then you're basically a healthy beast till you're 100 years old. And now we're actually doing studies on people, and we are finding that it works. Surprise. And so it's great to see that there is a lot of very data-driven research that is coming out telling us that mindfulness has helped to improve patients deal with chronic diseases. And I also want to just add that I feel stress either causes or makes worse certain challenges in the body. And so if we can just learn to short circuit the stress response within the body, that we're not in this, in our stress hormones are not getting activated, and we can bring ourselves back to a more calm and centered and grounded place, that itself helps us tap into our body's innate ability to heal and regenerate and fix things. And so, of course, not to say that everything can be fixed with mindfulness, and chronic diseases are much more severe and have a longer lasting impact on people. But I do look forward to more studies and research coming out to really help us understand what all mindfulness can do. But we have a fair amount of research now to tell us that it works.
And
Right.
just that, Jenny, I do a lot of work in hospitals. And one of the things that we do is focus a lot on this work on 3 things: pain management for post-op patients, physician and clinician burnout for exactly this, and pediatric pain management. And the idea is bringing these tools, and there's, as Pooja was saying, there's been more and more studies done on actual patients as well as clinicians on the impact of mindful therapies and alternative therapies to deal with pain versus offering more and more painkillers, as we have a big problem in this country. So
yeah,
I just want to add that.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to I wanted to add to that, Karina. I feel like this is what you're talking about. You were also saying something about in the past, like if you don't pause to look, it'll catch up with you. And it's the same thing with physical pain. And mindfulness invites us to just pay attention to it rather than avoid it, right? Because the last thing we want to do is bring our awareness to our pain. We want to just shut the system down so the nerves don't, they don't tell us that we're in pain. But ultimately, it catches up with us, whether it's emotional pain or if it's physical pain, unless we attend to it. And the sooner we do, the healthier we can be. But it's kind of applicable on both spectrums of physical and psychological health. It's like we have to attend to it, and mindfulness allows us to do it in a very gentle and powerful way, and actually release it from the system rather than let it accumulate and become even worse.
Right. And I was going to say the fact that when you feel stressed, your body can bathe itself in cortisol. By the practice of mindfulness, you can kind of avoid that, cortisol approach, and you can fight those kind of fight or flight reactions through just kind of calming your sense and bringing yourself back to center. And so this has just been such a great conversation all the way around. The activities both of you provided, the way to correlate mindfulness right back to diversity, equity, leadership. It's just been really great, and I'm so thankful and grateful to all of you as well as everybody that's attended. And maybe some final thoughts from you, Karina, and then you, Pooja. If we could get some final thoughts from you, Karina.
First of all, thank you, Jenny, because this has really been a fantastic summit, and I was fortunate enough in between my running around to hear some of the other panelists and discussions, and they were fantastic. So thank you for putting all this together. Really appreciate it, and thank you for inviting me to participate. And I guess my final 2 words are going back to where I started, or 3 words. Build a sense of awareness, listen to yourself, try to listen to others in building that sense of awareness, and finding moments to ground yourself. And develop those tools for yourself, and then you can eventually teach them to other people or incorporate them with other people. But if you don't cultivate that sense of awareness and listening to yourself and people around you, then you're going to be in this perpetual circle of stress and frustration and chronic pains, both emotional and mental and physical.
And Pooja?
So Jenny, me too. I want to give my heartfelt thanks for putting this panel together. This fireside chat has been so energizing. This whole event has been really enlightening and necessary. So thank you, Karina, and thank you, Jenny, for for this wonderful conversation. I always say that a calm leader is a powerful leader, and I really believe that right now we are at a crossroads with the big issues that are facing our companies and our planet right now, and we need mindful leaders to guide the way and to show the way. And, you know, as someone who was born and raised in India, I can tell you that what America does, everybody else follows with. Like, people model America's systems and frameworks. And so we have a very unique opportunity to set the tone for a new era of conscious leadership that can really have a ripple effect across the world. And so that energizes me and motivates me. And I hope everybody listening feels into that as well, on what a great time of co-creation we are at, and what is possible for us when mindfulness becomes part of our fabric at companies.
Well, again, ladies, thank you so much. I want to say heartfelt thanks to both of you, and you took a long time and a lot of time, and you have real jobs, and I know Karina was running from one class to the other and probably watching it on her phone. So you guys, thank you very much. Both of you have been great, and I've learned so much, and thanks to all the presenters that we've had. Thanks to AbbVie, who is our sponsor, along with Global Women for Wellbeing. Please do download the white paper that they've provided, because it's got some great research on equity and diversity and inclusion, and all the presenters have been great. So everyone, thanks so much. Our next session will be in June, on June 4th. It's going to be all about mental health in the workplace, and we'll have Nike and Hewlett Packard and Ernst & Young, and we'll have Pete Thomas from Biggest Loser talking about it's not all about the diet. So hope that you all will join us for that, and thanks again for everybody joining in, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.